I think we're going to get started. Again, welcome everyone, and welcome to our workshop today. I'm Martha Frank, a family consultant from Vermont Family Network. I'm on the education staff. All of our workshops, including previous ones, are recorded and can be watched on our VFN YouTube channel. The link is on our website, which is vermontfamilynetwork.org. Everyone who registered for today's workshop will receive a follow-up email with a link to this recording and a PDF of the presentation with live links. So for those of you who don't know us, Vermont Family Network has been serving families of children with special health needs and disabilities and the professionals who serve them for more than 30 years. We are the federally designated Parent Training and Information Center, the Family-to-Family Health Information Center, and the Vermont chapter of both Family Voices and Parent to Parent USA. So today's workshop is being recorded, so please keep in mind that as you share information about your situation, this session will include live captions. If you want to turn them on, click on live captions, live transcript, and then show subtitle. If you're comfortable, you're welcome to turn on your camera. You can ask questions using the chat box, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen. We will save time at the end of the presentation to answer your questions. Feel free to share information or links to resources that you found helpful in chat as well. We know that we can all learn a lot from each other. So today's workshop is Special Education Evaluation Plan and Report is the second in our 2022 Back to School series. I'm excited to introduce Ernie Wheeler, educational consultant with the Vermont Agency of Education. Ernie is semi-retired and has been in the field of education for 40 years. The first 18 years he spent as a school psychologist in New York State, and then has been with the Agency of Education for the past 22 years as a member of the special education team. Thank you so much, Ernie, for joining us today.
Quite welcome. So let me share my screens. Okay. Here we are at the Form 2 workshop. Again, my name is Ernie Wheeler. I have been doing this for quite a few years now. In fact, September 11th will be my anniversary date for coming back home to the state of Vermont. This is where I was born and raised. And I've been in the special education field for a long time. Not only was I the special educator for upstate, the district in upstate New York, I was also the Committee on Special Education chairperson, which is the same as being the special ed director in this state. So today we're talking about Form 2. Form 2 is the evaluation plan and report. And it covers two main purposes. One, it covers the evaluation plan, which is used as the guide to develop the plan to assess or a student's eligibility for special education services. As it says here on my slide, for initial evaluations, the evaluation plan, must be developed in a formal meeting. They do that because it's the initial evaluation for parents and teaches them some of the processes involved in special education. However, for reevaluations, the evaluation planning team can be polled to develop the plan rather than having a formal meeting. I do want to say, however, if a parent requests that meeting, that reevaluation planning meeting, be held at a formal meeting, then the district has to provide that in a formal meeting. They can't then just poll the members of the team. Form 2 also serves as the outline for the evaluation report. It fills in the information that's gathered as a result of observations, assessments, and other information. And those results of the assessments and information gathered by the team must be held in a formal meeting of the team. Now, the state has developed special education forms. I believe now there are 13 forms, including several, like there's a 5A and a 5B and a 5C. So there's 13 forms, but within the forms, there are sometimes multiple forms. There's only one form, state 2. And like I say, we've developed forms for the state, but most schools don't use our forms. They use one of 3 electronic special education record keeping systems. One is DocuSped, one is GoldView, and the other is Adori. They may not look exactly like our state forms, but the forms are required to include the same basic contents for compliance with state and federal regulations. These forms, these new forms, especially this new Form 2, just got put out last week. So you're probably not going to see the changes in the electronic systems until probably sometime closer to October 1st, because they're just getting the forms now and they will be developing them and putting them into their system. Okay, now I'm going to try to share my Am I still here? Can somebody tell me if I'm still?
You're
Oh, here
still
we
here.
go. Okay, I was having a problem finding it. I've got it now. There's Form 2. And this is the cover page of Form 2. Looks very much like the old form, or has the same information of the old form. It's primarily the demographic information for the students. It has the student name, the student count ID number, the grade, the date of birth, the current educational program the student is in. We put down county of residence only because for younger kids, preschool children, that's important in terms of some services that are available county by county. And so it's important sometimes to know the county the student is living in. Most importantly, though, is this bottom section. This bottom section that talks about the dates of the referral, the date of the planning meeting, the received consent, because it's the date of the received consent from the parent to do the testing that starts the 60-day clock. And the district has 60 days to complete an initial evaluation.
Ernie, could you make that any larger for our guests?
I don't know that I can.
Okay.
Ernie, down in the very, very bottom right-hand corner is a thing you could drag with a percentage. And there's a plus and a minus on the lower right-hand side. And you can
Hang on.
Perfect.
There you go.
How's that?
That's
Okay.
great. Thanks, Ernie.
All right. You're welcome. And can you see my cursor if I move it over there?
Yes.
Okay. So in this case, the received consent is the date that the district receives consent. So if you sign it on February 1st, but the district doesn't get it till February 14th, the start date for the 60 days is February 14th, not the date you actually signed it. So it's important to not only sign it, but get it into them as soon as you can to get that clock started. So there's next line is the report completed. So that's when the report is officially done and you hold the meeting and you make the eligibility decision. And then we ask the question, because this is the compliance question that we need to ask as a state, was the eligibility decision determined within 60 days of consent? And if it wasn't, then you should have been sent a Form 4 delay of evaluation, indicating what the reason was for the delay. And the reason really has to be child or family-centered reasons. It can't be for a lack of staff. It shouldn't be for things like snow days and stuff like that. But If that is the case, that might be considered allowable. And then we also put down here the date the report was provided to the parent, guardian, and ed surrogate. And the reason why we do that is because we want to know. We want to know how long it takes for them from the time of the meeting to the time that you actually get delivered the report on the student.
Ernie, is that a calendar day or a school day? On the
So the
60 days?
That school 60 days is calendar days.
Calendar days, thank you.
Unless otherwise noted in the rules, anytime they mention days, it's calendar days. It's not school days unless it specifically says school days.
Okay, thank you.
Well, so the next page of the evaluation and planning and plan and report lists the members of the team. There's several roles that are played here. There's the parent role, the student where appropriate can be attending those meetings, the LEA representative who makes the decision if the team doesn't come to a consensus, the decision for the district, the special education teacher or the service provider. If if a student, for example, is only getting speech services, it might be the speech pathologist as opposed to a special education teacher, a general education teacher for the child, an individual who can interpret instructional implications. Typically, that's the special education teacher or the general education teacher. And for kids who are being evaluated for specific learning disability, there needs to be an individual who can conduct diagnostic examinations. So they'll be able to explain some of the diagnostic examinations that were done during the evaluation.
Ernie, what happens if the school goes beyond the 60 days and they don't really have a good reason?
They have to well, what they should be doing is sending you a Form 4 indicating when they expect to get the evaluation completed. But if they don't get it completed, what happens is that at the end of each year, we look at the child count and check whether or not they've met their requirements for the 60 days. And they might get put on a list of districts that need to be monitored more closely.
Okay.
If indeed it looks like a systemic problem.
Okay, and we have another question rolling in. Can the LEA rep and a special educator be the same person?
They can, but the LEA representative needs to be somebody who's aware of the resources within the district and delegate those resources. And so for a special educator to be named the LEA representative, they have to have that authority, and often they don't. So I would question that if indeed the special educator was being designated as the LEA rep for that meeting.
Okay, and what process is in place for a parent if it goes beyond the 60 days?
Parents can file a complaint with the state of Vermont because the district did not follow special ed regulations.
Okay, so an administrative complaint.
Administrative complaint.
Okay, thank you, Ernie.
So at the bottom of this page is the disability determination section. This section begins with a list of all the disability categories. From autism spectrum disorder, intellectual disability, all the way through to, I was hoping it was there, developmental delay, which is mainly for the younger kids. Developmental delay is only to be used for students who are less than age 6. Once you get beyond age 6, then it's the responsibility of the school district to use the other disability categories. However, if the district chooses to use a disability category other than developmental delay for someone who's less than 6 years old, then they would also have to prove adverse effect, which are not required to do for the disability developmentally delayed.
Okay. So we have some more questions popping in. This is a lively crew.
It's okay.
Does the state report more than one disability category for a child?
Each team should determine what is the primary disability for a child, although children with multiple disabilities that are equally affecting the student's academic performance or functional performance could be listed as a multiply disabled child. But typically, we don't have two disabilities unless we're, again, going to call it a multiply disabled student. Could they give me an example of what they mean by two disabilities?
Well, I can think of one. I don't see anything in the chat box, but I know that there have been times that students who are on the autism spectrum, actually the category of disability that's sometimes selected is emotional disturbance, because they may have a lot of anxiety. And we've seen that checked off before, so.
There's nothing in regulation that says that a student on the autism spectrum cannot have emotional issues, but they really should choose one or the other because it shouldn't be both. Because certainly characteristics of autism can manifest themselves like an emotional disturbance, but the primary disability is the autism.
Right. Thank you. We have seen it. We've seen it the other way sometimes.
Okay. Section B of this particular section in Form 2 has to do with the list of areas that are going to be assessed. So you list here the area of concern to be evaluated, the assessment area. The concern could be academic achievement, could be behavioral functioning. For an ADHD kid, could be attention span. So the assessment area might be cognitive skills. It might be achievement testing. It might be behavioral interventions or behavioral management. All of those things go into this section. This section wouldn't be completely filled out at a planning meeting, however, because one of the things they talk about is assessments, evaluations used. Here, we don't typically ask the evaluation team to list the tests to be used. We leave that up to the discretion of the evaluator. We do ask that the professional who's administering the evaluations be listed here by their title, not necessarily by their name. You put your name in once the report is done, who did the actual evaluation. But in this case, you put the professional's role. For example, if it's a special educator who's going to do the achievement testing, if it's a school psychologist who's going to do the cognitive assessment, if it's a psychologist who's going to do the behavioral screenings. Those are what are put in here, and at the end, then you put the actual names of the people who did the assessment.
Right. We have another question.
Sure.
Actually, two more questions. What about being blind and developmentally disabled? Which one would they list both of them?
Well, developmental delay includes kids with medical conditions. And so if blindness is considered a medical condition, is it deaf blindness or just blindness?
The question refers to being blind and developmentally disabled.
Okay. In that case, they could go with either category, but if they're going to use blind or then they would need to prove the adverse effect, which I think would be fairly easy to do.
Okay. And the other question, I know in the past, when I've worked with families, we've really talked to families about what their concerns are. And a family may say, my child's not performing well in school. I'm worried about his handwriting, and I think he has sensory issues. And in the past, parents were able to kind of add those to the evaluation plan so that all of those concerns were addressed. Is there room for that here on this form?
This is what in developing the plan is why parents need to be at this meeting, because these are the areas of concerns or areas to be evaluated. This is the place to put it in. This is the place where their voice needs to be heard in terms of making some of those decisions at the plan.
Okay. Thank you. Because I know parents have, when they've asked questions about handwriting, sometimes they've gotten verbiage back saying, oh, Johnny's handwriting is just fine, when what the parent really wanted was, what can you use any nationally normed test to see what percentage rank he is in for legibility, for writing speed, and those are two different ways of approaching looking at fine motor skills. So just wondered where that would go.
Yeah, it would go in here, and then underneath this, where we start to talk about the results of the evaluations, here's a spot that talks about evaluations and information provided by the parent. So it's not just the evaluations that the school is doing, but it's also information that the parent may have from outside sources, or even from work samples that the student had while doing work at home, where they might do work without the support of school staff that they have in school.
So one of the questions is, how can parents make sure that the area of concern is actually covered? For example, if a parent does ask, how does my child's handwriting fare? Because we've heard it, we've heard examples of schools coming back and saying, oh, that handwriting is just fine for Johnny, when maybe if they had done some normed tests, they'd find out that Johnny was writing for legibility in the 5th percentile and absolutely needed assistive technology, because that kind of information would drive different kinds of services. So the question is, how can parents make sure the area of concern is covered?
It needs to be in the plan. And before you sign consent to the evaluation, if it's not there, ask for it to be put in there prior to you providing consent for the evaluation.
Perfect. Thank you, Ernie.
This next area down here below, listing the evaluations and the people who will be conducting those evaluations, are the results of the evaluations. Like I say, ones that you get from parents, one you get from observations by teachers or related service providers, and then all the other assessments that were done. This one here at the bottom is a really important thing, that if an assessment was not conducted under standard conditions, it should be in the report of the person who's doing the evaluations, but I think it's also important for the evaluation planning team to look at, because a lot of times, I think of kids back in my day who had an emotional disturbance, weren't doing well in the classroom situation, but when I took them in to do a one-on-one test under optimal conditions, they did well. They had the skills. The problem is that their functional performance within a classroom setting didn't demonstrate the skills that they could show under optimal conditions. And I think that's important. And so I think, having this as part of the plan now, or highlighted in the plan, is an important addition to our form too. It was one of the first arguments I had when I came to the state of Vermont. Again, then there's a summary of the evaluation results that's put in here. Also talks about present levels of academic achievement that comes from certainly the classroom teacher and the evaluations that are done. And then this new level, present levels of functional performance, because not only is it important to assess the educational performance of the student, but how the the functional performance of the student affects their performance in the classroom. Again, I think about my ADHD students who have attention problems, who come into my room and take a test again under optimal conditions that they don't see in the classroom. And what effects that has on their performance within the classroom setting, as opposed to the test scores that you get under optimal conditions. Behavioral information, if indeed there's social and emotional issues that are causing the problems within the classroom.
We have another question.
Sure.
What is the definition of functional performance?
Functional performance is any behavior or anxiety that the student demonstrates that affects their educational performance. So it could be that the student is overly uncomfortable in large groups, has difficulty making transitions from one subject to another subject. I'm trying to think of other things that might affect a student's,
Because it looks as though behavior is listed separately on this form.
Well, behavior, yeah, behavior is, I think behavior in a lot of cases talks about the manifestation of a behavior, of a severe behavior within the classroom. And functional performance could be, something simple as attention span. It could be the inability of a student to transfer efficiently from a morning activity to an afternoon activity.
Thank you.
Yeah, it could be a number of factors, but behavior tends to be, he's tipping over desks. He's inappropriately touching or bullying another student. Here, under eligibility verification, we talk here about a student not being found eligible due to certain factors. One is the lack of appropriate instruction in reading. Sometimes students come to us from other schools or other learning situations where they haven't been given the same instruction as their peers. And so sometimes they test low because they just haven't had the proper instruction at this point. Also, a lack of appropriate instruction in math. Also, a student can't be identified as having a disability if they have limited English proficiency and we're not able to test them in their native language. So that's another exclusionary factor to being identified. And then at the end of every section, the planning team needs to conclude whether or not they met that eligibility requirement. In this case, does the student conclude that the student met the disability determination in an area of disability? And you list the disability and check yes or no. The next section is adverse effect. And adverse effect has been around for a lot of years. Next year, it'll change significantly because on July 1st, 2023, even though we'll still be looking at adverse effect, we'll no longer require that students be in the lowest 15th percentile. So, but for this year, we still have this in the form. At least one basic skill must be determined to have an adverse effect on a minimum of 3 of 6 individual measures of school performance. if a student is not found to have an adverse effect, then they don't qualify for special education. But they have the disability. And we'll get to this later. There's a spot now in the form that reminds districts that if a student has a disability, but not the adverse effect or the need for special education, then they need to be referred to the building principal, who then has to ensure that these students are given a 504 team meeting to determine whether they qualify for a 504 plan.
That's
But we'll
great.
get to that. But we'll get that at some point. If this district is looking at 3 measures and the student only fails or falls in that lowest 15th percentile in 2 out of the 3 measures, they have to continue looking and using these 6 measures until all measures are exhausted to make sure that they didn't qualify for at least 3 of the measures. And they can't use a single performance measure to determine adverse effect. You can't use just the test score to say, it's adverse effect. You need to use the test score, students' grades, examples of the students' work. All those kind of things need to be gathered together to tell the story about the adverse effect on the student's educational performance.
Ernie, can schools use subtests instead of the whole score?
You can use the subtest if it matches, to one of the basic skill areas. And here are the basic skill areas. Basic reading skills, motor skills, reading comprehension, math calculation, reading fluency, math reasoning, written expression, listening comprehension, and oral expression. It has to match that. For example, there are tests out there that have a written expression score, but that written expression score is a combination of both written expression and spelling. Spelling alone as a subtest doesn't match up to any of these basic skills, but the written expression subtest does. And so you could use the written expression subtest. So here in this area of the form, the team would check the boxes for the areas that they are concerned about. And then at the end, they would check the boxes where the student met the adverse effect. Now, the requirement for the state is that at least one basic skill is measured and met the 3 measures in order to be declared as having adverse effect. All you have to do in this section is document that one basic skill. If you have other basic skills that you're concerned about, that can either be done here in the adverse effects section, or it can also be addressed in the needs section when we're talking about the other needs of the student for special education services. But for compliance sake, for paperwork reduction's sake, they only need to document this one basic skill in this particular area for adverse effect.
So if you have a student, let's say, who has mental health challenges and they're suffering from depression, but they're very bright and there's absolutely no work samples because the student has not been attending in school, can the lack of work samples count?
Absolutely. It's not just the quality of their work, but it's the quantity of the work. And we have students who, the expected output for the semester was 20 assignments. And this student, because of an emotional disturbance or mental health issues, only completed 8. But those 8 were very good. And he was given a modification where he didn't have to do all the work and was just graded on what he turned in. So his grades look good, but he's only doing that because of a modification.
Right.
And if there is no work sample, because again, he didn't turn things in, that's an important factor. So under written expression, you might say something like, of the 20 assignments, he only did 8, or of the 20 assignments, he turned in 2. And
That's an important distinction.
And that would make it significantly different than his peers, his typical peers, and place him in the lowest 15th percentile.
I'm glad you clarified that because we often hear about students who have mental health issues who never qualify for anything because of that scenario you've just described, when they in fact really do need some kind of services, whether it's an IEP or a 504 plan. So thank you for clarifying.
Yeah. Again, it's one of the things that needs to be discussed at the IEP meeting, and when this requirement for the lowest 15th percentile goes away, I'm hoping that it increases that robust discussion of what the student needs, based on just what you're saying. They may come in, and like I said, as a former school psychologist, I know I've had kids come in and do really well on the tests that I give them in optimal one-to-one conditions, mainly because they know me. They were familiar with me. They didn't have a problem coming in and doing their best on the test that I gave them, but we didn't see the same type of behavior or results in the classroom situation.
Right. Or those students who have anxiety and cannot enter the school.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, because in that case, no information is information. If you have no results, then that tells you something also, and places the child in a situation that's unique to, again, 85% of his peers.
Thank you.
And this is where the team documents the assessment areas done, the professional who did the evaluation, and the measures that were used. And these are the 6 measures for school performance. One is the individually administered nationally normed achievement test, which is usually done by a special educator or a school psychologist. Again, usually done one-on-one in a separate location. The second is a nationally normed or normed group assessment, typically done in the classroom, in a group situation, although some students do take them with accommodations outside of the group situation. It's important to address that when again, this information is reviewed, because the student may have done well on that test, but only because he was afforded the proper accommodations and modifications in taking that test. Had you taken that away, we ask school districts to use their professional judgment as to where they think the student would have fallen had they not had those accommodations and modifications. Grades and other measures of educational proficiency, because not everyone uses grades anymore. They sometimes use proficiency-based report cards. So there we're asking again where that student stacks up in comparison to his typically developing peers. Curriculum-based, such as benchmark assessments or progress monitoring, typical of students who are involved in some type of intervention outside of the classroom, or even within the classroom, that's different than the general ed curriculum that everyone else is taking at this time. They're getting some type of intervention, and what is their progress on that, and how does it relate to the typically developing peer? Is it less than 15% of the peers that are doing this alternative intervention within the classroom? And I'm sorry for the way this cuts off here. This should be a page break, but the next measure 5, is criterion reference assessments. Some of the testing that is done by school psychologists, or even sometimes the checklists that are done by medical professionals, are criterion referenced as opposed to norm reference. And so you fill out a checklist that has to do with student behavior, and there's a rating scale, and that criterion is is held against some criteria set by the testing people, the testing publisher. And then there's other measures of school performance. This is where samples of the student work, classroom observation comes into play. This is where I think parents could bring in samples of work done at home without, again, the assistance that students you typically get in the classroom or a resource room situation, that I think might be helpful to say, okay, these are samples of the work that my student does in school, and these are the types of work he can do independently. And sometimes there's a major difference, and I think it's important for the evaluation planning team to see the difference between the two. And then again, there's the summary question at the end of this, which is asked, did the evaluation team conclude that the student met the adverse effect requirement in 3 out of the 6 measures on one basic skill area? Yes or no? And if it's yes, then we move on to section 3, which is the need for special education. And here what we're trying to figure out is whether the student requires specially designed instruction, special education, that cannot be provided through the student's educational support system or through the school's standard instructional conditions. It means standard supports that are available to all students within the building. If the student needs something more than that, does he need special education services, or can their needs be met through some of the standard supports available within the school? I think back to my days as a school psychologist, where if I found a student needed a intervention or a supplementary reading program, they might be better off staying with my Title I reading staff because they had the bigger toolbox. They had more programs that they could provide for a reading impaired student, as opposed to my special educators who are more general practitioners. Whereas if the student had a reading, a math, and a written expression issue combined, or just reading and math, I might send them to I might say that they need special education because we need something that involves all of those aspects rather than just the reading. If it was just reading, I might keep them with the standard supports available within my school to all students through the Title I program.
We have another question, Ernie.
Sure.
For eligibility under specific learning disability, how can a parent ask for the evaluation that's not the discrepancy model?
Well, the district has to be able to do the other model. And so you can ask for it, but if they're not capable or ready to do that yet, the only option they have then is the discrepancy model. They can do either one, but they have to be ready to be able to do that.
Thank you.
Okay. Here under B, we talk about the early childhood special education. Here, you're not talking about standards, instructional conditions, or supports. Here, we're talking about the future success in home, school, or community without intervention prior to enrolling in elementary school. So typically before the child turns age 6 or age 5 if they're going into kindergarten. Whoop, I went up instead of down. And then there are questions necessary to be answered. Which needs, if any, can be met within the general education structure? What accommodations and modifications are necessary? These are important to fill out because it'll inform the 504 team. If indeed the student's not found to have a need for special education services, again, there's that referral to the 504 team. They're the ones who are going to develop those accommodations and modifications to be put into a 504 plan. So it's important to have that. C is again talking about specially designed instruction that cannot be provided through the educational support system. And here it talks about a referral to the 504 team. And here, as I said in the adverse effects section, here's another list of the basic skills that may be addressed in this section that weren't addressed in the adverse effects section.
So
Martha?
a question, Ernie. So
Sure.
let's say a student has a learning disability. They don't
Okay.
qualify for special education, and the learning disability has been identified as dyslexia. Would the family be able to request under a 504 plan special education services specific to a specific reading program to remediate the dyslexia?
The district doesn't have a Title I program?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
Yeah.
A 504 plan could be accommodations and modifications as limited services. So it might be something that's put, temporarily into a 504 plan, but it would need to be reviewed to determine whether or not it's one, being successful. So I would also put in there a date to review how that program is working. But yes, services could be put into a 504 plan.
Including special education services.
Including special education services, although there's no funding for 504.
Right. Thank you.
But it is possible, but it would need to be reviewed to determine if indeed that would be the appropriate measure. And again, I would be looking at other supports within the school to see if, that's available through standard supports.
Okay, boy, we've got a chatty group today. So
Okay.
if a discrepancy, this is good. If the discrepancy model was previously used for a specific learning disability, how would a record review be utilized for reevaluation?
How would a record review be used?
Be utilized for a reevaluation.
For a specific learning disabled student?
Mm-hmm. I'll read it again.
I would hope they wouldn't use a record review for that. I would hope that you'd do a reevaluation, especially for the academic achievement. I'd want to see what growth they've made in 3 years.
Great.
If you're just doing a record review of what made them eligible 3 years ago, then they're still eligible.
Right, and you've missed your opportunity for new information. Thank
Right.
you.
Yeah, I think it's important to look not only at new testing, but the information from the interventions that were tried over the 3 years to see what growth, if any, has been made. That's one disability category where I would have problems with it being a straight record review. Let me go back here for a minute. Okay, these are the other areas of basic skills that may not have been addressed in the adverse effects section, and the same for the early childhood development. And then at the end, again, there's a summary of the evaluation planning team's decision regarding the need for special education services. Again, checkbox yes or no. And then there's the decision of the evaluation planning team regarding eligibility, which simply states that the student met or continued to meet the special education eligibility requirements under certain categories, or did not meet or did not continue to meet under certain categories. And if you agree with the eligibility decision, we go back to that initial second page, the fourth column where they ask you to agree or disagree with your initials. You either check yes or no, and you put your initials there if you agree. I can't say this enough, that agreeing at this time does not preclude you from disagreeing later and requesting an independent educational evaluation. You can agree to what they've done so far, but somewhere down the road you can say, wait a minute, I think we didn't do something, or I think there's something missing here from the information, and I'd like an independent educational evaluation. You can ask for that. Even though you checked you were in agreement at the time that report was issued. Because this is a new page to Form 2. Report of disagreement. This is where you have the opportunity to send this form back to the school saying that you disagree with the results of the evaluation. Here, the initial paragraph, again, talks about the referral to the building principal for 504 evaluation. If indeed a disability was found, but adverse effect or need for special education was not found. But the second paragraph talks about if you don't agree with the evaluation used to make the decision, you think something was missing or something wasn't included, you can ask for an independent educational evaluation. The school really has two choices in that after your request. One is to say yes and to pay for that independent educational evaluation. The other thing they can do is they can request a due process hearing to prove that their evaluation was indeed comprehensive and complete. That is their choice. They could go to due process or just say yes to the evaluation on their dime, not yours. Again, it talks here about parental rights. One of the things it does down here at the bottom of this form that I want to declare is that it asks here for the reasons for your disagreement. Regulation says that districts can ask why you disagree and why you're asking for an independent educational evaluation, but you're not required to tell them why. All you are required to do is ask for the independent educational evaluation. You can tell them it's for academic achievement, it's cognitive, but you don't have to tell them anything. You just have to tell them that you disagree with the evaluation.
We have another question.
Sure.
Bear with me. If a parent can use the independent educational evaluation to get the evidence-based assessment, if the school used the discrepancy model for SLE eligibility. I'll read it again.
Please.
Can the parent use the IEE to get the evidence-based assessment if the school used the discrepancy model for the SLD, specific learning disability?
I think you're going to have the need to tell me more about the IEE and how they did that, because the IEE, the non-discrepancy model would require an intervention over a period of time and the student's response to that intervention. Is that what the parents are saying? Is that what the question is involving? Is that the parent is coming in with information from an intervention that was conducted over a 6 to 8 week period that they're now going to provide to the school?
I'm not sure.
Well,
no more in the chat on that one.
So Ernie, I guess the question really is, if a school can only do a discrepancy-based model, can the parent use the IEE to have something different done? Because they've disagreed with the
well, they can have something different done, but I'm not sure how that's going to happen unless it's an intervention outside of the school that's going to be conducted over a period of time. Otherwise, they would just be getting another discrepancy model from an outside evaluator.
Okay, thanks, Ernie.
Okay.
Just to let folks know, we're at the 5-minute mark.
Okay.
So if you have questions, certainly pop them in the chat.
I just want to give people the opportunity to have my email address and also my phone number if you have additional questions or you want to email me a question.
Thank you, Ernie. Thanks for putting the information out there also. So thanks for all the very helpful information. You'll see the link to an evaluation in chat. Please take a few minutes to complete it so we can make improvements and fulfill our grant requirements. We have many, many more interesting workshops coming up, and you can find details about those on the Vermont Family Network homepage, which is vermontfamilynetwork.org, along with the links to the previously recorded ones. We have tons of information on our website, and getting connected with us is really easy. You can follow us on Facebook or join our closed Facebook page if you're a parent. We have two closed groups. One is for all parents of children with disabilities, special health needs, and one is for adult children. You can also sign up for our monthly e-news and check out our YouTube channel. We have many, many archived webinars that are very interesting. We're here to help. Please contact us by phone or email. And thanks again, everyone, and have a great day. Ernie, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. Really appreciate it.
My
Thank you.
pleasure.